Well, no, they won't say it in your face, but they'll do it with a smile. But things are still separate. Your friends are your Mexican friends and your white friends, and people kind of hang out that way. Families hang out that way. It's just not as overt. When I was about 10, 11 years old, my mother was letting me go through her yearbook, and it so happened that she was the first Chicano homecoming queen of her high school. One thing led to another. She just asking her when she graduated, how old she was, and at that point she told me, I was 20 years old, almost 21 years old when I graduated from high school. And so I was like, well, why is it that you graduated from high school that late? Did you fail? Were you not good in school? And I just remember her telling her, no, what they used to do when I was in elementary school was they would put us in first grade for several years. And I was involved with a court case as a little child to change that system. And that was really the only time that she ever mentioned it. She passed away in 2002. And I started questioning myself, why wouldn't I have known that? Why wouldn't I have had the opportunity to discuss what it was like as a child to go through that? The case was really about racial oppression and the maintaining of a racial hierarchy. Even though the district wants to say that the reason they were doing that was because these kids don't know how to speak English, the teachers aren't prepared to teach this type of student, we don't want to take away from the white students, so we're going to put them in their own separate class for their own good. It wasn't about that. What it was really about was keeping a racist structure in place so that, you begin to discourage little kids at the very early stage. You create a system where they're not getting a quality education. You're discouraging them. You're telling them they're not good enough. And you do that by putting them into a beginner, a low, and then a high first grade, and then a segregated second grade. You can imagine what it does to a kid when they're in high school and you're having to go to kids who are 3, 4 years younger than you are. Once I found out about it, it just fascinated me. It fascinated me, but also really bothered me, the fact that I didn't hear it from her. So I have to talk to as many people as I can find. They're gonna ask the question, and what was it about the culture down there? What was it about the time period that people didn't talk about that, Mexican American or white?
Why do you think the case is so forgotten?
I don't know. I've even asked attorneys, do they teach this in law school?
They don't?
Not the ones that I've talked to. I don't know. It's not one of the high profile. It's not a high profile kind of a case, and that's one of the.
But it changed education in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, it led to other cases that came after it. I mean, it was a specific strategy that the GI Forum was using. They were picking certain cases to put their resources behind. Mm-hmm. This one led to another one, and it led to another one, and so it's part of the strategic mission, I think, that they had.
Mm-hmm. And the racism is so different in South Texas. I didn't know that there was such a thing until I left. And I started looking at it from the outside and understanding the level of, not just racism, but the level of oppression, especially class, the differences in class. And people will say, oh, la muchacha, the maid, es parte de la familia. Oh, come on. That doesn't happen. And it's this false sense of security, of we're different, we're better. You know, we wouldn't do that. But you start looking at the lack of resources. That's racism. The lack of access. I couldn't go away to a four-year university. We didn't have one. 80% of the kids who entered first grade in 1954, which is when I went to first grade, did not finish high school. I'm one of 20%. And then how many of those went on to a graduate program and to a PhD? I mean, it's minuscule.
When the school district would allot money, they would, each school was supposed to have a certain amount of money they would take from the Mexican schools to enhance the white schools, and then would say, there's no money for you. Okay? So it wasn't even, it might have started, quote, equal, but it didn't end up equal. Okay? So that's not by accident. That's not by being sensitive and saying, oh, too much money will spoil the kid. Although they used to say that. If you pay the Mexicano too much, he's just going to go drink and do all bad things. And so you protect them by. But the reality was, if we really had to educate them, if we really had to do something for them, it would take a lot of resources. And if we prioritized, who then would be the ones who need it? These young people, these children. And so I think in part it was ignorance, it was lack of education, it was indifference, and then mixed in contextually in a segregated, hostile society that said, why should we take the time and spend the resources to upgrade this community?
They're going to try to say, the white side's going to try to say, we were trying to help them because they couldn't speak English. No, you wouldn't.
Why do you think they would want to say that, though?
But to cover their actions. You're not going, you know, if you know you were dead wrong, some of them old folks are not going to admit that they were wrong. They need to justify their actions.
I'm trying to reach Mrs. Schubert. This is Enrique Aleman. I'm with the University of Utah, and I'm doing a project on the Driscoll court case from the 1950s. And although I'm focusing a lot about the history, I also wanted to give somebody on the school board an opportunity to talk about some of the things that are happening in current day Driscoll schools.
What are you hoping to get out of that interview?
I want to talk to a school board member to see what has changed or what their perspective is on what was happening in the past as well as what's happening current day Driscoll. What is it you know about the Driscoll case from if anything?
Not much. Not much at all, except that it had to do with I'll say the word here in a minute. Race, the thing with the educating the children the same and that kind of thing. Yeah. Segregation and that stuff.
Yeah. So a group of families there got together with some lawyers and sued the school district because they were putting kids in a beginner first grade, low first grade, and high first grade. Mm-hmm. If you're putting a kid in 3 years of first grade, if we know that you have to start early with them, what do you think that does to a kid by putting them in first grade for 3 years?
Well, I'm sure it was hard on them. I'm sure it was. Yeah. But because even if nobody told them they failed, they know they failed because they didn't go on. I'm sure that it was, but very hard on them. But would it have been a greater disadvantage to send them on through school when they could not read or write? You know, where they dropped out in the 6th grade. I think they did it because the teachers thought it was the best way to educate those children. And the school board, to me, was right. I mean, how can you expect farmers, not educators, to tell a whole school of teachers how to teach? You know, I would never do that. Never do that.
If you felt like something was unequal for a student,
Yes.
I guess that you probably, regardless of your education or what you do, you probably would say something to a teacher go, I think this is wrong.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to, is that these men, whether they're educators or not, you would think one of them would say, this doesn't seem right, because not everybody.
Yeah.
Did
Did the families bring it to the school board?
Yeah.
They did?
I'm finding out looking through school board minutes, they had been asking them to look at this, and so they were aware of it, but, you know, Gordon Green was involved, and so I'm sure that they were consulting with him and consulting with the teachers, and like you said, making a policy decision at a district level.
Yeah, that's what they should have been doing. Yeah, and evidently they said, you know, this is the way it's done everywhere. They took the easy way out, you know. This is the way it's done everywhere. What's wrong with the way we do it? This suit could have happened in any school district in South Texas at that time. You know, they were all doing that. But it's you know, it's part of the history of Driscoll.
I did not know about it, sadly, but I knew of cases like that where those kind of things went on. It's, you know, it's a very sad time in our history, but yet it's an opportunity for us to learn from and make sure it doesn't happen again. Our kids do very, very well. And I see people struggling with the at-risk population. Driscoll is, you know, 80 or more percent economically disadvantaged. We have an extremely high percentage of Hispanic kiddos, and those are the typically targeted at-risk kids. And we do very, very well with them. And I tell people all the time when they ask me, you know, well, what does it take to teach here? Well, it's hard to teach in a district like this. Only because when you have an affluent community, you can pretty much just show up sometimes, because some of those kids, they're self-learners, and they can, you know, you don't have to necessarily work as hard. But with our kiddos, you do, and we have just brilliant students. And we have been able to offer them opportunities to show their brilliance and to show that success. And that's the thing I'm most proud of. There's lots of things that could have been done. I think at the core of it is just treating that child with respect and dignity, and not just because they couldn't speak English thinking they couldn't learn. And that's a mindset issue. And that is tolerated at some point by the administration level. And that's not tolerated here. And so, you know, if we were to get a child who was a Vietnamese student, we would be in that same exact boat, because none of us speak Vietnamese. But we do know how kids learn to read. We do know how kids learn to speak English. We do know those things. And so utilizing those strategies in the reading program and throughout the day are the ways that those kids are going to be successful.
You were making a comment about the trustees and how they're very different today. Mm-hmm. Do you think that contributed to some of the racism that went on then?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for these gentlemen. I could assume that's probably the case. But really, they were just doing what they were taught at that time. And unfortunately, that was the way that it was. And I mean, it doesn't make it right at all. You know, people back then and that warped way of thinking, that they thought it was fine. You know.
Dr. Lohan's office is sitting. May I help you?
Hi, I'm trying to reach, I don't know if Dr. Lee is still in practice.
No, he isn't.
I'm one of his old patients, and I'm trying to get a hold of him. Is there a way?
You'd have to look into the Bishop phone book. I believe his home phone is listed.
Okay.
Have you looked in there yet?
No, I'm calling from Salt Lake City, Utah, so I don't have access to that, but...
Okay, hold on. He's listed in the phone, but let me look for you since you're calling from out of state.
I appreciate it.
And your
you're an old patient of his?
Yes.
Are you a person that used to live here in Bishop?
I'm from Kingsville. My mom actually used to work for him.
Oh, really? Who's your mom?
Lupe, Aleman.
Aleman? That name sounds familiar.
Way back. Way.
Yeah.
And then we ended up, he put my braces on. He was my dentist my whole childhood, so.
Wow. Cool. His home phone is 584.
Back over the years, like seeing Miss Green and some of those people in Claude Hinton's wife, they were very, very, very dedicated teachers. They worked hard for the kids, and they wanted the kids to learn, and they had a lot of pride in their little community. I don't know what all else went on that I wasn't aware of, maybe, but they really had a lot of community pride and everything that we were proud of back then. And you could feel it in the way the teachers were. They were really nice people. I don't know what the case was about, or I never did read about the case later on, but I did read what you said about the staying in the, holding him over for 2 or 3 years there in the first grade.
Yeah, they would put him, like in this picture, they put him in the high first, and in the second grade they would put him in the same classroom.
Okay.
You know, and the Anglo kids, they would just have them in the first grade. So I think, I mean, that was one of the ways that the district was trying to get them to integrate, you know, into the English. Is what the superintendent and some of the teachers are saying.
My goodness, how Gail Brown, you bring back some old memories. I don't recognize, I remember this family.
Roethlisberger?
Yeah. At the time you were going through it, we didn't even think anything about anything being wrong about what anybody was doing, you know, and it was just wasn't even talked to her in the young kids circles. It wasn't even thought about, you know, because like I say, my best friends we didn't have many black people in the area, but my best friends, and growing up in Driscoll and even going to school in Robstown, my best friends were Mexican boys, you know, and I knew more of those. And I know my dad in business, he worked with a lot of those people and had a lot of them working for him. And there was a Latin American school that was separate, maybe and I don't remember when they joined. I remember going to school with all the kids, but I don't know when they joined us, you know, like we went there through the 10th grade. I went to school in Driscoll through the 10th grade. I know in the first few years, I know that they had the Mexican kids went down to this other school, but I don't remember. We all played together and did sports together and everything so much. I kind of don't remember when it was that actually they were physically in school, or whether it was just messing around, you know, at school activities or what, you know. So, but it just, you know, it was just we just had fun, and all the kids were the same, and we ran around together and played basketball on the basketball team together, and same way when I went to high school at Robstown, you know, and everything. So you didn't really think about, well, I didn't, that this is a Mexican boy and I'm not a Mexican boy, or whatever, you know. You just kind of didn't
talk about it.
Didn't really pay any attention. Your hindsight is always very good, you know. You look back and see a lot of things in hindsight that you aren't aware of, you know, at the time.
Sure. Perfect.
Did you feel like it was a racist town?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's very subtle when you live here. When you go away, you come back and you look at the world differently. You feel it the first day of school. I mean, when you're asked to change your name because the teacher can't say it, or because it's not an Americanized name, and even as a kid, you change it for them to make it easy.
You know, even in theaters here in Robstown, all the Anglos would be sitting in the front, in the bottom, and then they would send us upstairs, you know. They had a place for when the men wanted a haircut, if they went to Bishop or wherever they went, if it was an Anglo's barber shop, they couldn't go in there.
They had to go somewhere else to get their hair.
Well, another, you know,
Right.
Mexican American, you know, they would do that. Life wasn't easy for us. I don't think we had time to think, you know, things like that. My brother died in 50, and my dad in 55. I mean, before that, we used to work. He would take us to, you know, to the field, and we would pick cotton. He would go to West Texas, and we would go and pick cotton, chop cotton before that, you know, during the summer. So.
How was that? The work was hard? The cotton work?
It was, but you know, I guess we were used to working there so many years that, I mean, I'm not ashamed. You know, if I had to go and pick cotton, but I was telling my brother, I love to see those fields, you know, white with cotton. But I think that if I bend over, I wouldn't be able to get up, you know, at my age. When Miss Cindy told me, you know, about the case, I said, well, I heard that the GI farm was involved, you know, and there were ladies that belonged to the GI farm, but I mean, we didn't know what was going on, because all we did was work.
As each of the rules change, for example, in 1949, the Texas State Superintendent of Public Education sort of sets a policy forcing schools to desegregate on the basis of race, that then schools respond by implementing new strategy. Oh, then we're going to segregate on the basis of language. They have no linguistic ability. So now we have trustees agreeing, oh yes, they're Spanish speakers, they need to be separated. IQ testing, another great example. Courts find that IQ testing cannot be used as an excuse to separate students. They invalidate IQ testing results for Mexican American children. So then we see school districts turn to culture. Oh, it's their cultural deficiencies. There's problems with the cultural attributes of Mexicanness. So for that reason, we need to track or separate Mexican American children. So as the rules change, trustees and administrators find ways to create policy that still meets the interests of the larger community, right? Of those who are in power and in control in communities. And in the case of Driscoll, farmers who owned the land, who owned the community, who were on not only the city council but on the school boards, had power and the control, and were able to make these decisions.
They were looking at what best suits them as farmers or community, and maybe not with malice. Oh, these kids are dumb.
Yeah.
It was more like it just helps us. It helps the whole community.
The business practices.
They didn't think
yeah.
of, well, how can we make these kids better people and better citizens, as opposed to we got to keep this community going. It's just kind of interesting.
But yeah, the whole reason they invited Mexicans into that community was so they'd have labor.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, they have to educate the children. That's state law.
You go around and she wasn't angry about anything that. It's just, you know, they were having a court case. And, you know, when you have a court case, you've also got to have certain accusations, you know. And I'm sure they was thinking that was going to reflect. But I never did have a real in-depth conversation. She wasn't really angry.
Do you think that, was it that she just thought that they were doing the best that they could as far as educating all the kids?
You know, what before when they had them, why other people didn't demand? I think people, we are just born into a world. And we sit there and, you know, when you're little, you like everybody. And we get over, and as society goes along, at the time we were growing up, the Anglos, you know, had the, if you have an upper hand, you have a lot of poor people coming from Mexico, plus you could say they were different. Even after they fought World War II, you know, if you had racial prejudice, we should have learned it then, but we didn't. Probably gets back to economics, but when the majority of the money is with, you know, the Anglos or whoever it was, you know, where we divide black and brown and white. They can have a lot of, you know, I'm sure back a long time ago you had some very well-off Hispanic people that were real rich. You know, everybody probably mixed real well then, you know. It was just a prejudiced attitude. You know, you grew up with that, and that's what it was, you know. I remember one time, and my kinfolks they played six-man football, and I remember there was one kid that was a really good football player. He just mixed right in with everybody. What was his name? And I remember him saying, and all of his buddies around says, "Why, he's just like a white kid," you know. That really was, it might have made him feel good in a sense, but it was also an insult. You know, if he started thinking about my grandpa and grandma, and not to make, it was a compliment in a way, but it was kind of a backdoor compliment. You know, you're saying, well, everybody white's better than Mexican people.
I mean, one of the things I've always been struck with in South Texas is the number of Mexican-American youth who come to college with no knowledge of Spanish and a sense of incredible guilt and shame for their inability to communicate in Spanish. But the reality is that if their parents were in the South Texas public schools in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, then they were discouraged from speaking Spanish in the public schools and oftentimes subject to corporal punishment or subject to rules and regulations that penalize them for using their own home language. And so as a result, one of the solutions that Mexican Americans took on for themselves was simply to stop speaking Spanish and stop teaching Spanish to their children. Then you have 2-3 generations later, groups of Mexican American youth and young people and adults who have lost this bilingual capacity. I'm a great example of that. My parents experienced that kind of punishment in the public schools and decided, I don't want my child to have this negative school experience, so I'm not going to teach my child how to speak how to speak Spanish so that they can succeed in the public schools. So my brothers and sisters and I are all predominantly English speakers. We've learned Spanish as second languages, whereas our parents learned Spanish as their first languages. And that sense of shame and guilt still remains. You either feel ashamed because you spoke Spanish, or you feel ashamed because you have no ability to communicate with your great-grandparents, with people in your community because of that.
Mrs. Wilson, she was a mean lady. Teacher, she's the one that get in trouble or anything, she would put your hand with a ruler.
That was for speaking Spanish?
Even speaking Spanish, yeah. Even in the school ground, if you spoke Spanish and the white kids would turn you in, you would get the battle then, in the school grounds. But in the room, la rula.
So you don't remember anything from the court case, like if people around town were talking about it? It just seems like people might have been, oh, these guys are starting trouble, or...
I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. Of course, I was young, but I didn't know anything about it.
But you were older than...
Yeah.
Because you're
1 year.
45? You were born in 45 or 40?
46.
All the friends that I graduated with, I mean, they're... most of them were younger, también. And so, when you're young, you really don't think about those things, I think, you know. It's when as you get older, like, say you're a senior and you're 20, then that bothers you. To this day, I can walk in a room and I feel, you know, because we hang around with a lot of white people.
Oh, yeah.
In the rallies, there's not many Mexicanos.
You ought to see what...
But you can feel it.
When she gets off the motor.
Yeah.
And there's people at the service station with an automobile.
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, even here in Fredericksburg, visiting one of the parks there, I've had bad experiences, and I can feel
Why? Because they don't expect you to be driving a nice motor?
Yeah. You're Mexicano, and sometimes I think he's gringo, and what am I doing with, somebody like that? Little do they know that he's more Mexicano than I am.
First grade. We were speaking Spanish as kids would when, you're playing. And she was really angry. There were 2 or 3 things that we had done that day. So she lined us all up. We had to extend our hands. These are like first graders, right? Little 7-year-olds. And she went down the line with a ruler. And we each got 3 whacks. And of course, some of the kids are crying. I was trying not to cry, but I heard everybody else crying. It's really traumatic. And especially for speaking Spanish, it's not like you can just switch it off and say, oh, I'm not going to speak Spanish. It's who you are. And even in the playground, we would be running around and shout things in Spanish, and we would get punished. And I'm talking 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Ya by 6, si no aprendiste. You were more careful, yeah.
We were told, you do not talk to us.
Who would tell you that?
The teachers, especially Mrs. Green. She was a teacher, and then her husband was the superintendent at the school. We heard kids getting spanked all the time. That was a small school then. It was just that one building, and the 3 where the white kids had to go were on this side, and then the Hispanics went down the hall. On that side. I don't know what was on the other side other than the office, but they would take them to the office right there. They'd spank them.
So you could hear it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was it like a paddle or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had one of those, big paddles.
I say it's insidious because in many ways, it went to the core of our psyche. It's amazing how many Mexicanos do so well, how well our parents fought through that and gave us, to those who did, a stable home environment and situation, because it was very difficult.
One of the original plaintiffs, and for somebody who was very, very instrumental in getting this court action started, was Albesa Hernandez, a mother who, her first child started school and was immediately starting to be held back, and she knew that the kid was not needing to be held back.
When I had my first boy, the first one that I had, well, he went to school, and when school was out that he was supposed to be passed to 2nd grade, they passed him to 1st grade after a whole year, and it was supposed to be low first, they passed it too. I didn't like it one bit, so I went back to school that same moment he got home, and I talked to the superintendent in here, which was Green, Mr. Green. And Mr. Green just heard me, and he said, well, no, it's the law of the school. I said, the law of the school, well, we'll find out about that. And that's when I decided, and I went and started, with some of my friends that live here. Then we went and we talked to Dr. Garcia and De Anda, and we had to take them to court. Even the teacher that was my son's teacher went and told me that he could do 2nd grade work, and she went and told Mr. Green, but Mr. Green, the superintendent, said no, it was the law of the school. After we took him to court, Mr. Green went up there while I was on the hall. There was no need for that. We could have fixed this up there in school. I says, how many times did I go and talk to you? Didn't you tell me it was a law of the school? I says, it's a little too late now.
It's like unspoken histories that are very real, and they continue to be with us, and people seem to be tiptoeing around the issue, both white and brown.
but I want to go back and talk to the people that lived it. I want to know what it was like as a child to testify.
They drilled me what to say, what to do, when to stand up. But it was still scary. I had no idea what to expect. It just seemed like a big audience of people. It was so intimidating. I just wanted to get it over and done with, to go home. And then the next day we went to school. And I was scared. I wondered, were they going to say anything to me or do anything to me? Right? Yes, they were nice, like nothing ever happened. They never mentioned it. When I grow up and my children start talking, they're going to speak English as their first language. I'm going to have them go through what I went.
My guess is a lot of the white students had no idea that they were going to school with people who were 2 or 3 years older than them. Did that ever make you feel ashamed?
Oh, very much so. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because, I would tell them, no, I never stayed behind, but it's just the school system. When I went to school, when I started school back in this little town named Driscoll, and they were like, yeah, right, she probably stayed behind. She just doesn't want to admit it. It was embarrassing, very much so. There were times, I can't pinpoint it when, but there were times that I felt, gosh, had I not stayed, or at least the grades, I would have made something of myself, especially as I've gotten older, going to graduations, college graduations. I get this chill, even if I don't know if that person is not related, just the fact that they're graduating from college, I feel, wow, how wonderful. Had I had that opportunity, if I could turn time back again, that would be so wonderful.
Marcelina, aquí está Ricky Alemán, el hijo de Lupe Alemán, y quiere hablar contigo. ¿Quieres hablar con él? Ok, bueno, aquí está.
Hi, Marcelina. Hi. Is it okay if I record it? That way I can remember what you said?
Well, yeah, but I can remember Mama. I was, what, about 8 or...
Yeah, you were about 8 years old. Do you remember anything about the court case and going there?
I remember going to court. I remember being there in the court testifying, asking questions.
Do you remember the kinds of questions they were asking you?
We were allowed to play with the Anglos.
Yeah.
We were separated in class from the Anglos.
Okay.
They were taught different from us,
Did you go to high school, or did you stop going to school?
No, I had to quit because my parents
to help out.
So I had to quit, but I went on into the 7th grade.
Some of the people have been telling me when they were in school that the teachers would hit them if they spoke Spanish, or they would get in trouble if they spoke Spanish.
They would tell us, and if we were speaking Spanish, if they were going by, they would tell us, no Spanish. Yes.
Yeah. Do you have bad feelings about what happened to you?
I don't know, because back then I didn't know what was going on in the first place. I didn't know what I was there for.
What kind of work did you do, or
I
you got?
just took care of my parents, and but I can't work because no education, and I took care of my parents and for a while. I got married, and for a while I took care of a elderly lady. That was all the work that I could do, housework and all that.
And you
paid not to do the work.
And you stayed in Driscoll pretty much your whole life?
I got married and stayed here in Driscoll.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, what I wanted to do in life. We were poor, and there was no chance to go to college, and
Yeah.
I mean, my parents, my dad was from Mexico, and my mom was from here, but no education either. She didn't go to school.
Do you think now, when you started having kids, that you became a lot more
active in the school, and you
Yes. When I had my boys, because I wanted a good education for them. I didn't want them to go through what I did.
Right.
Wanted them to get a good job and not work in the field. Yes. Can I tell you the truth, how I felt about that?
Sure.
Afterwards?
Sure.
That I felt that I had been used. This is how I felt. I had been used. I didn't know what was going on, and that I wasn't understanding, and it was kind of embarrassing.
Right.
That people say that I had gone to court to fight the school when I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
See, now I can go and fight and not be able to be proud, but back then, like I said.
You thought differently back then.
Back then, yeah, because
Well, thank you for your time again, Marcelina, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Okay.
I'm sorry, like I said, if you welcome you into my home.
It's okay. No problem. No problem.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Esperanza. She was...
Era, sí, muy querendona, very close to her kids. She had two. But then she was there every day in school.
Making sure.
And at lunchtime, she would, because they didn't eat there at school, she would take
Well,
them
like she said, she was worried that she didn't want what happened to her to happen to her kids.
Yeah. But see, way then nobody pensaba. Nadie pensaba, no, we did nothing wrong.
From your perspective and looking at some of the work that you've done, has it changed at all, or has it changed much for Latino students specifically?
Specifically for my work with my dissertation and my research was on bilingual students and how they were continually overrepresented in special ed, and a lot of them were based on language because they had a language disorder. And there's been cases from the 1970s, some of the special ed cases in out of Arizona or California where parents sued the district similar to the Driscoll case, but because the students were being placed in bilingual special education programs because they were being tested in English and considered mentally retarded. From my research, 30 years later, it's still consistent that students are overrepresented in special ed. They are being placed in special education sort of through what we call or what we would consider like social constructions of disabilities based on language.
I don't think people know how to talk about race or racism. So
yeah,
so it's like everywhere else. But I think that's one of the reasons it continues to exist.
Well, my dad was on the school board. He never mentioned anything.
Mm-hmm. So your family's been around too. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a Polmeyer.
They were very prejudiced people, especially Daddy's oldest brother. He's the one I told you that watched the Ku Klux Klan hang a black man in the river bottom.
What was his name?
Ben Palmer.
Ben Palmer.
Yeah, and I didn't know that until after he'd been dead for years.
You didn't realize that this was happening?
I didn't know it
the
until I read your paper, your article. When Erlinda Morgado died, she was, I think, 62, and I was 59, and I thought, that's wrong, because she was a year behind me in school, and I failed a year, so we got caught up. So I should have been a year older than her. And
you were 3 years younger than her.
Yeah, and I never understood that. And then you were telling me that your mother was 21, or it said in the paper she was 21. Mm-hmm. Well, she was 3 or 4 years behind me. Mm-hmm. And she was actually my age.
About the case, what kinds of things do you remember from the case? You told me before you don't remember that much about it, but what are the things that stick out, if anything, from that time?
Well, I remember very clearly that Dad said, whatever you do, just say the truth. Whatever they ask you, answer it, and never add to it, never keep things, just tell it like it is, you know.
Do you remember being scared or anything, or just kind of? I know the teachers were there and the principal was
I
there.
remember that the teachers were sitting right there, and they put me on the stand, and I was only 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And I remember Ms. Wilson and Mr. Green. Those two are very vivid in my mind. They were in the very front. And they kind of twisted things. They kept asking the same question different ways. So, but I was too young. I was very young to remember a lot of details.
Some of the things they would do to you when you spoke Spanish, what kinds of things? People have told me they've been hit, they've been put in the corner, they've been...
You'd get put in the corner, and then you couldn't play recess. That was like...
Which is a big thing for a kid.
Yeah. We couldn't go outside or anything.
Once you got into high school, do you think that affected the mentality, you know, the psyche for those kids who were, like my mom, she was 3 years...
People thought she was a teacher. Because she was big. She was at 5'11", okay? And people that would see her in the hallway that were looking for the office, they would ask her. You know, like, they thought she was too old to be in junior high or whatever, you know?
You know, people don't talk about race or racism or the segregation that was going on. Whether you're Mexicano or Anglo, people just didn't talk about it. Why do you think that is? Even today, people still don't want to talk about it. Like, when I talk to people in Driscoll right now, it's like, well, that was the past. Do you think it's just that the culture in South Texas that people don't really want to speak about those types of things, and it's kind of not a very fun time?
It was not fun time, and you kind of want to get it past you and move on, because there's no sense in dwelling over it. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up, and I'm so proud of you, but our kids and grandkids don't know the half of it, because we didn't talk about it. Like your mom never told you. Because you feel like, well, that's something we went through and it's past. But...
Do, like, your grandkids know about it before that?
No, I never told anybody, not even my kids.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it, too, when I talked to you at your Chuy's house that one time when I came down for Wilita's headstone. When I interviewed you in front of everybody. I mean, even the example that you shared, I mean, it's very painful. When the teacher didn't let you go to the restroom.
Oh, yes.
That...
I think about it every day, even now.
Yeah.
You don't forget. Because it's something very traumatic. And then I had to walk home that I had messed up, you know? And I didn't want to go back to school. My mother kept me for 1 day. She said, but you're going to have to go back. It was so embarrassing. And then she didn't even send me to the nurse. She sent me home.
Just straight from the classroom, just go home. Which teacher was that? Do you remember?
Ms. Wilson.
Ms. Wilson.
Nowadays, there was nurses also then. But nowadays, they send the kids to the nurse if they have problems. You know, get cleaned up or whatever. But I was little, you know, and I went through so much.
This one?
Yeah. This one. I remember her más gordita.
So you raised your hand to go to the bathroom and she just ignored you?
No, I asked.
She went up and asked her.
In English?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
We knew better.
Yeah, because you get hit, right? So she just refused.
She said no. And I had to go so bad. And so before I knew it, I had already pooped. And I guess she felt like, oh well.
I'm not cleaning.
Yeah. Clean up.
Our communities have felt left out of the historical record, and that's a consequence of subtractive schooling, the denigration of our own knowledge, our own cultural beliefs, our own language and linguistic contributions, and that subtractive sort of attitude toward Mexican culture and ideas includes Mexican-American history. And then we've become reticent in sort of pushing our own historical moments, recording our own historical moments. And I think attached to that is a lot of pain. Once you begin to uncover what actually happened in the early 1900s in this sort of era of Juan Crow, the separation of the races in South Texas. There are very painful memories associated with that, and many people do not want to tell those stories. Maybe as a protective measure for themselves, and certainly as a protective measure for their children. It's without any kind of historical knowledge about the way Mexican Americans have been treated in the school systems. Individuals, students, don't know what to do with that sense of failure or sense of shame that's associated with their inability to succeed in public schools.
There was something wrong. That why was I older than everybody else? Were they conscious of what they were doing? You know, as adults, I certainly think so. They set you in your place. You got a place, and that's where you're going to stay. There was no, I don't remember at any time visiting a white friend across town. Once school was out, you went your separate ways. And that was it.
Why do you think you were able to go all the way through? Did you have, some people have talked about how their parents insisted that they do well, or was it just inside of you that you were going to keep going? And...
My deal was sports. They passed that rule, no pass, no play, so I had good grades all the way through, and that's what kept me going. There's no telling how many, beside us, how many other kids were impacted the same way. Why were they graduating at 20, 21? It's ridiculous, and it impacted a lot.
We did have leaders, we did have activists, we did have people who resisted. Did they all do it the same way? No, they did it in different ways. And kids today should learn that. Because, like you said, there are teachers right now who are discouraging kids. There are teachers right now who have very low expectations of our students. They're not being told you can go to college from a very early age. They're not having those kinds of expectations put on them.
You realize, at least my generation, probably your dad's generation, was that we were the outsiders. That we were always orphan children, or we were invited in, and the invitation could end at any time. Okay, that you had to conform, the whole notion. And there's a certain amount of conformity to anything. We have to, this institutionalized conformity. But there was always the sense of you got out of these meetings or this situation, you said, now I can go home and I can feel relaxed.
The goal was to de-Mexicanize every individual of Mexican descent, whether that was in the public school or in the workplace, whether that meant Americanizing you by denying you your language in the school, whether that meant by shaming you or degrading you in public to force you to toe the line American style. The goal was simply to rid the communities of what they thought of as a Mexican blight. Mexicans were here as laborers, and the goal was to keep them in that position.
Do you remember going to the court case, to the courthouse, hablando con los abogados, or do you remember any of that when you were at that age?
I was really too young.
You were too young. You don't.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah, it's been a long time ago.
Yeah. So what happens when you finish going to Driscoll? Did you move aquí a Bishop?
Bishop to better school. My dad thought it was better school and more community.
Right.
More civilized people.
Yeah. They were telling me too, cuando the little boys would speak Spanish, they would make you bend down and with a paddle también. Did that ever happen to you or no más?
No. It happened to me. And the paddle had holes on it, like that. No poquititos.
And who used to do that? I heard Mr. Green. Mr.
Green?
Yeah.
Me senté ahí con dos maestras y bend down.
Yeah.
Grab your ankle.
You were saying the gringos and the Mexicanos, they didn't treat them equal. If they were going to treat you both equal, do you think you would have finished all the way high school? If they had been treating you the same?
Yes. I think I would have. I don't carry a grudge. Because damn well, I could have done it.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Same here.
All right, take care.
Nice meeting you.
All right, you too, man.
Primo.
Primo.
Primo nuevo.
Have a good night.
Pues ahora sí me quedé a pie. ¿Me das un ride?
Where you want to go?
Aquí.
I'm devastated.
Are you glad we talked to him?
Yeah. Obviously, he struggled. I mean, we've heard we couldn't find him. This is the first time we've been able to find him. Obviously, he struggled a lot. Not all the kids that participated ended up that way, but it impacted his life. You know. What Connie and what Ray and what Marcos and Marcelina and my mom and Mary and Carmen, all that they did was for a reason. And what they stood for is still relevant today. The resiliency and their activism is still relevant today. And we have to honor that. And they should know that. How can we use this case as a model for the way we should be preparing our kids? Even though I didn't know about the case, I must have known in some way. Even though my mother didn't tell me the story, I knew deep down. And I think that's why I ended up at the University of Utah. I think that's why I was able to get a PhD. I think that's why I focused on issues of Latinos and Chicanos in the schools, inequity, social justice. And I think that's why, along with my colleague, I co-founded and now co-direct this university partnership, where we start working with kids as young as 5. And even though I'm in Utah, a lot of these kids, when I see their faces and you see the potential and you see their intelligence, they're the same as the kids in Driscoll. They care about their schooling, and it's almost 60 years later, and it hasn't changed. So it's a way for me to make up for the chances that Connie didn't get, and Marcos didn't get, and Marcelina didn't get, my mother didn't get, and Ray. it becomes more and more clear the more I think about it as to why I do the work that I do. And it's fulfilling that way.